Canada's trade gap with the world has narrowed. New numbers from Statistics Canada show exports rose nearly 1% in July, while imports slipped. That brought the monthly trade deficit down to just under $5 billion. For more on these numbers and what's behind them, let's turn to the CBC's Anis Heydari. He joins us from Calgary. Hey, Anis. So can you drill down these new numbers for us?
Yeah, when we're talking about a trade deficit, what we're saying is that this country still imports more than it sells, but that gap did narrow in July of 2025 compared to the month before. Canadian exports did go up 0.9%, but that is higher than the month before. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this is after a big drop back in April, one that StatCan called a sharp decline months ago, and this hasn't made up for that. It is worth noting that metal, aluminum in particular, saw a drop in exports that StatCan pointed out is offsetting some of the gains in exports in other merchandise. And that's kind of a reminder for us that these U.S. tariffs are still a major factor for Canadian businesses in deciding where they want to sell to and how much it might cost them to sell to other places. Because, of course, American customers who are trying to buy anything that maybe has aluminum in it or steel will be facing a tariff. But we are seeing that Canadian trade around the world has gone up in July of this year, I should say. 2025 is this year, Arthi.
Thank you for clarifying, Anis, because sometimes I have this issue myself. It's hard to keep track of all these things, all these new numbers too. But what I know you can tell us for certain is what this means for the Canadian economy. What does this say about how we're doing?
So it's interesting to note that in the midst of all of these tariff discussions that we have and the seemingly daily or monthly changes to them, that the Canadian export numbers are bouncing up a little bit. It shows that maybe things are not quite as bad as they might seem when you hear things like 30% tariff, 10% tariff, 25% tariff. And a big part of that is that there are still a lot of exemptions to tariffs to the United States for shipments to the United States under the Free Trade Agreement, CUSMA. And you can see that reflected in these numbers. Exports to the United States went up for a third straight month. So it's important to remember that even though we talk about tariffs a lot, many Canadian exports seem to be exempt from them. Now, those exemptions cost time and money. It's not easy, but it does mean that many businesses aren't hit as flat out as they might have been. And in particular, when we look at exports to the United States, they went up with more energy, think crude oil, more passenger vehicles, think cars. And the thing with automotives is that production had already slowed down overall this year because of the tariffs that we had talked about and their impact on not just auto production, but the Canadian economy as a whole. So the fact that they'd already slowed down overall and then saw a little bit of a tick up in July is maybe reflecting that things are starting to come back to a slight equilibrium. At least that's what we see from some economists who are commenting on this. But there's always a but. If we compare these numbers for July to the year before, if we compare the first 7 months of 2025 to the year before, we do see lower exports to the United States than the same time last year. It's something else that I think the audience might be interested to hear. In the other direction, things changed a little bit as well. Imports from the United States to Canada, those fell in July, Arthi.
Okay, thank you for this all, Anis. That is the CBC's Anis Heydari.